anniversary of my ordination as a Unitarian Universalist minister. 6 years before that, I was ordained at the Cathedral of St. John the Divine in New York as an interfaith minister, after going through 3 years of training in religious studies, spiritual practices from all kinds of people in all kinds of places. I look at my interfaith ordination as my worldview, and my Unitarian Universalist ordination as my home base. This is where I am at home. This passage has not been without ups and downs, which is true for every single minister I have ever met, and I know a lot of ministers. I'm going to share with you some of my thoughts about what ministry means in a Unitarian Universalist setting. We could say it's all about who's in charge. I say that because it was made very clear to me in theological school that a Unitarian Universalist congregation does not belong to the minister. It belongs to the congregation. It's up to you to run this place, to keep it going, to enrich it, to celebrate it, to spread the word about it. I may do that. Of course, I never stop talking about the fact that I'm a minister, but you are the ones that people are going to relate to if they want to come in here and be here. Ordained ministers begin life just like everyone else, as lay people. They have the same human frailties and foibles that everyone else has. Unlike most lay leaders, however, they feel called to commit themselves to the profession of ministry, be it in a parish, in a community setting, consulting, as developmental ministers, as visiting ministers, as chaplains, and so on. It's often part of significant personal hardship, financial, marital, spiritual, parental, and academic. The former, from some time ago, district executive for this area said, unless you are married to someone really wealthy or you have inherited wealth, do not go into the pursuit of ministry as a Unitarian Universalist minister. This is not a well-financed calling. Many of them, but not all, these ministers, I say, describe their experience of feeling or hearing the call. The details may vary, but the sense is often the same, of realizing something deep inside leading one irresistibly into service for a faith tradition and community, no matter what the cost is. That's exactly what I experienced. I broke down completely during theological school at one point and had to take time off. It was a time, medical students often go through this when in medical school. The stress is intense, the requirements are intense, the expectations are enormous, and one is up against it all the time, up against oneself and everyone around them. Not to do so, not to continue on that path, would feel ruinous to one's sense of being, to one's core identity. This is what those pursuing ordained ministry do and what they are all about. There are many lay people who consider going into professional ministry but never start, or who begin the process and then leave. It's just too much for them. Or they realize it's not the passion they thought it might be. Some would rather not deal with all the hurdles in front of them. Some discover they're not called to handle conflict management, and trust me, there's a lot of conflict management in congregations around this country. Some can't manage the financial sacrifices. Some can't manage the stress of balancing family and ministerial life. As always, personal situations determine these decisions. Those who continue down the path towards ministerial fellowship and ordination go through a very long, grueling process in which they're shaped by years of academic study, pastoral counseling training, rigorous scrutiny by people more experienced than they are, vast amounts of reading and writing, ongoing education with other ministers, psychological assessments, and often debt. I finally paid off my student loan about 4 years ago. And I'm well into my late 70s now. You can imagine what that was like. This is an arduous journey, at times daunting, even frustrating. While it can feel like an endurance test, this training is really intended to help prospective clergy mature and grow. That is its purpose. They're not trying to torture you, even though it feels like they are. That is the purpose of all those trials and tribulations, to grow hearts, minds, and souls as preachers, teachers, healers, speakers, friends, and leaders. In the best of all possible worlds, ordained ministers are driven by a desire to serve and care for others. A bishop in India said to me, Jesus didn't ask for a commitment to him. He asked for a commitment to the people who are here. My commitment is to you. That's why I come here twice a month, 22 Sundays a year. Isn't this what we as Unitarian Universalists are to be about? A commitment to the people who are here and to those who will follow us and the generations to come? In the best of all possible worlds, everyone in a Unitarian Universalist congregation, including the ordained clergy, has a desire to minister according to his or her gifts to the community of which he or she is a part. Hopefully to the greater faith community beyond and to the world community at large. Within our congregations, that may mean making the coffee, tending to the building, leading worship, nervously standing up here, joining committees, holding someone's hands, and simply listening closely. Putting it another way, and I've said this so many times that it's now in our opening words, here you will be cared for, and here you will be asked to care for others. In the 1500s, and I can't believe I'm going to quote him, Martin Luther spoke of a priesthood of all believers. UU congregations went way beyond Martin Luther. We have never had priests or priestesses, although a friend of mine thought I was a priestess and insisted on telling everybody he introduced me to. I was a priestess. Our gatherings are home to all sorts of skeptics and seekers, as well as believers. Our gatherings are created to be democratic communities in which we covenant to make room for one another, and in which we recognize the inherent worth and dignity of every person. At our best, we are, and this is my term, communities of ministers, some lay, some ordained. In the best of all possible worlds, each of us is driven by our caring behavior. In our caring behavior by love rather than by fear. Love reveals itself in a sincere interest in the well-being of others. Fear often shows up as insecurity, manipulation, power, and ego-tripping. Love and fear in various forms and sizes are equal opportunity drives that can be found in both ordained and lay leaders. What do we do about that? First, we have to remember that each of us is human, including the minister. Second, each of us has his or her unique gifts. Neither ordained clergy nor lay leaders are saints. I had said for 20 years now that I was not ordained into sainthood. I was ordained into service. Now, you may think I'm a saint. No, not even close. We're not really about sainthood, after all, but about reality and transforming our lives and living conditions for the better. Second, each of us brings emotional baggage with us. Together we arrive at community baggage, like in the airport when the bags are going around. Yeah, we have that in our congregations, and don't pretend we don't, we do. Third, there's variety and a range of talents among us. As time goes on, some abilities may wax and others may wane. There's always the possibility of surprise, growth, and change. Sometimes ministers choose to move on from a congregation. Sometimes congregants choose to move on from a congregation. Sometimes congregations move on. The fourth point here is that the road divides when it comes to responsibilities and what these are going to be in any particular congregation. And these really have to be determined and clearly understood by everyone concerned. In hiring negotiations with potential ordained clergy, Both sides need to know what they are hoping for and what they are getting, at least as far as that is possible. We must ask ourselves, who is going to do what? And what happens if a complication arises? How do we address and hopefully resolve conflict? How do we keep refreshing ourselves, transforming ourselves as our numbers shrink or grow? Of course, the beginning is just the beginning, and things can and do shift over time. Accepting change is critical to both personal and congregational growth. Concerns from either side need to be reviewed in the beginning and all along the way, preferably as soon as they arise, not months later. And this requires maturity on all sides. A recurring theme in congregational life is the interplay of authority, responsibility, and accountability. That's why I raised the question, who's in charge? This includes understandings about congregational autonomy and the matter of who is in charge of what, both lay and ordained. How do we fit everyone together to contain and honor all players? Developing a covenantal agreement of right relations, in addition to a contract, between congregation and clergy helps to clarify the nature of the mutual regard for and the responsibilities to be assumed by each. A job description, after all, is not identical with expectations about roles. We need to get as much out in the open as possible. Transparency lies at the core of healthy congregational life, and it requires us to be thoughtful, kind in our expressions, and honest with ourselves and each other. The covenant helps us live in a spirit of walking together, for we are in this together. We need to avoid hiding our concerns and to avoid whispering about them to everyone but the person concerned. Whispering leads to bad feelings. I was reminded of this again when I spoke to a friend who lives in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. I officiated at her wedding many, many years ago. I'd been to the church there for several services, and I knew the minister there, and I said, "So how is? He's not here anymore." And I said, "Why not?" "Well, a campaign was started to oust him from the pulpit, and it succeeded." And I thought, wow, I cannot tell you how many ministers I know who have been forced out of congregations because of the wishes of a very few people in the congregation. It doesn't take a lot of people to cause upheaval, and often that upheaval is kept secret. The secrecies and secrets in congregations are deadly to the health of the congregation. This is why I say be careful about whispering. If you have an objection, well, to me or to each other, talk it out. Find a way to confront it directly. Talking about it with third parties is what we call triangulation, and it's not a good habit to get into. After I left the congregation, where I thought I was going to be for about 7 years, I noticed all the ministers I knew who had been through the same thing. And I also noticed that every minister who came after me got the same treatment from that congregation. Wow. It was one that ate its young. Unitarian Universalists are often surprised by this behavior, but it's part of the system, and you need to know how to handle it. There's an important distinction between lay and ordained leaders when it comes to accountability, and this is important to remember because most lay members are not aware of this. Clergy are accountable to lay people inside the congregation and outside it to the UUA and the UU Ministers Association authorities. Ordained ministry is both a career and a calling, and clergy may and do face the possibility of official investigations, sanctions, and so on, to which lay people and congregations as unique entities are not currently subjected. In this sense, the congregation has power over clergy. Congregations cannot be spanked and corrected by the UUA. They're independent bodies run by congregational polity. And yet, as I say, there are congregations that eat their young, and this has not stopped in the 20 years I've been in ministry. The current imbalance means that congregations have the responsibility of staying at the table when times are tough, of making sensitive and heartfelt decisions. Asking anyone, staff or member, to leave ought to be the decision of last resort. After all, to whom is the congregation accountable when things aren't working well? Or when the congregation itself is behaving badly? Although we talk about congregational polity and like to think we're all standing on a level playing field, it's not entirely true. This means that congregations need to set boundaries for disruptive or inappropriate behavior that apply to everyone in it, both staff and membership. We are progressive, but we cannot be entirely permissive people and expect to experience healthy congregational life. Healthy congregations that grow and attract new life have a clear sense of purpose and vitality. They understand that just because we are religiously liberal, we are not perfect people. Let's remember that we're not perfect people. We make mistakes. Just because many of us are self-professed liberals does not mean that we are not capable of that old-time word, sin. Ordinarily, I only use that word to describe food. But there is such a thing as sinful behavior, as in missing the mark, as in choosing the wrong path for dealing with the difficulty, without being direct when it needs to be. Let's remember that as with other things in life, no minister or lay leader can please all of the people all of the time. Ministerial candidates are ordained into service, not sainthood. Along those lines, it is well known that people frequently project their issues onto clergy, transferring to them, conflating with them, identities that stem from earlier relationships. And I cannot emphasize this enough. One theological school professor said, the biggest burden the clergy bear is the projections of the congregation. People assuming that they know what's going on with the minister when they've never had a one-on-one personal interaction with the minister. How often does the laity think about that? Is it aware of this tendency? I don't think so, not unless it's pointed out. Does any of this sound familiar? There have been different ministers serving this congregation. I first spoke here in, 1999, and there have been several ministers in between since I started up again. I once had a congregant who insisted on treating me as if I were her mother. I didn't know that's what she was doing. She apparently had sent me an email that I did not see because this was a much larger congregation. I got dozens of emails every day. And then someone told me that she was really angry at me. I had disrespected her by not answering her email. Well, it was just a lapse in paying attention. It wasn't a crime that I was committing. But when we sat, I called her up and suggested we have a cup of coffee. She said, you reminded me of my mother. And I had a lot of trouble with my mother. And I said, you know what? And she said, what? And I said, I had a lot of trouble with my mother too. And then we started laughing. And we ended up having a good time together sorting out her issues, which was she was turning me into her mother, which I didn't know. And I was very surprised to hear that that was the issue, and even more surprised because she was a psychologist. Well, we laughed a lot about that. And after that, no problems. Everything was clear. Ironically, members are sometimes aware of the fact that some clergy have their issues and agendas, and that a minister's projections can move in their direction. Perhaps the issue of projection needs to be reviewed from time to time so that instead of one assuming one knows what the minister thinks or feels, because that is what you think or feel, the congregation's members with concerns would take the time to explore the subject in private with the minister. This is why typically larger congregations have covenantal relations with ministers. They have committees on ministry that review what the minister is doing, that review what all the lay ministers, that is the entire congregation, is up to. By the same token, no one wants to find him or herself the target of a minister who goes after individual congregational members in private or public. I haven't seen a minister do this, but I'm sure it has happened. Target practice, no matter who is shooting, contradicts the observance of our own first principle to respect the inherent worth and dignity of the entire congregation. Some members of some congregations do not remember this principle. Ultimately, it's only too easy for some to drive members or ministers away with callous treatment, innuendo, or triangulation, that is, speaking about others rather than exploring with them any concerns they may have. In that congregation that I found so troubling, several people left the congregation because they couldn't take the behavior of the people who were in charge of the congregation. They simply couldn't stand it. In fact, on my last day, people came up to me en masse at my last service and told me they were ending their memberships in the congregation, all because of what had happened there. This is all very destructive for everyone. It leads to heartbreak and often to unfairly tarnished reputations for the target. We are joined in the unique task of building what Martin Luther King called a beloved community. Instead of assuming we know what each of us is thinking, let's take the time to get to know one another and to explore our hearts and dreams. This takes time, commitment, and interest. In building a community of faith, let us remember our guiding principle of acceptance of one another and encouragement to spiritual growth in our congregations. Let us find and set appropriate boundaries and accountability zones. Let us create committees on ministry that nurture all sides and examine what we all do and what we are all about with care. Let us determine to speak the truth with love. Let us advance in our emotional and spiritual growth by owning both our joys and our concerns in our relationships with one another. Let us move toward pledging ourselves to greater service, just as the hymn said, and to the creation of covenantal agreements that awaken us to our intentions as giving, sharing people. Let us work to stay at the table. Let us practice appreciative inquiry, focusing on what we want more of rather than what we want less of, so that we move forward, not backward, so that we relate in healthy ways. If we hold to this course, we have a better chance of making our congregational dreams come true. Ministry is a partnership in work and spirit, and it's up to us, all of us, lay and ordained, to help our congregations succeed. What makes a minister? The conscious decision to serve others as we, lay and ordained, go about the business of changing and healing the world, both within and outside our congregations. If by asking who's in charge we mean who is responsible, then I believe the answer would be each of us, according to our gifts, who participates in and commits to congregational life. Amen.